It's 11:34. This is To The Point with me, Bev Turner, on GB News, live on your TV, radio and online this morning. Now, Rishi Sunak says that lockdowns could have been shorter, different, quicker. We could be in a very different place. He says now, with the benefit of hindsight, that some of us never needed. Apparently, as the economy tanks, he regrets the government's COVID strategy, stating that the scientists at SAGE should never have been put in charge of the country's response. Well, who knew? Thanks for that, Rishi. Now I can sleep at night. Except, of course, I can't, and I won't, until there are arrests over the despotic, unscientific measures of the scamdemic and the perverted profits sucked up by vampirical pharmaceutical companies, aided and abetted by a media paid off to the tune of £300 million, paid for by Rishi Sunak's department with our taxpayers' money. If you empower all these independent people, you're screwed, he now says in reference to SAGE. We shouldn't have empowered the scientists in the way that we did. True, especially when a leading member of SAGE is a lifelong member of the Communist Party and might just have enjoyed that frisson of power. But Rishi's wrong. You can empower scientists, except that, as with any medical decision, the consequences of which could be life-changing, you always seek a second opinion. Are you telling us, Rishi Sunak, that you didn't have the chance at one of your SAGE meetings to ask them to read, your colleagues to read, the Great Barrington Declaration, for instance? That statement, written in October 2020 by some of the world's top epidemiologists and public health scientists, in which they expressed their grave concerns about the damaging physical and mental health impacts of your policies, instead recommending more focused protection for the vulnerable. They were publicly discredited as fringe, according to leaked emails, and denounced as quacks. You should have had the gumption, Rishi Sunak, to insist to your team that there might have been a different way. Sunak conceded, you have to acknowledge trade-offs from the beginning. If we'd done all of that, we could be in a very different place. Do you think? Is he finally referencing the necessity of a cost-benefit analysis of lockdowns? Indulge me for a minute while I show you a clip of me in June 2020, less than 3 months after the first lockdown. Lockdowns are not medical. Lockdowns are political. They are based on a misattribution of data. They are based on poor testing statistics. They're based on a disease in which 98% of people who catch it will be fully recovered within 3 months. Now, I don't show you that as an I told you so. Well, I do a bit, actually. It's quite satisfying. But let me tell you, after making such statements on TV, I was vilified by the press, demonised on social media, and written off by former employers as a selfish granny killer. But it was so obvious if you chose to look. You didn't need to be the Chancellor to see what was coming. You just needed to switch off the BBC, seek out people who were looking at facts rather than trilling with emotion like this woman.
And it's fine that we kill a few million, thousand, hundreds of thousand old people? Is that okay?
No.
But that's what you're basically saying.
No, when we started out on this, and Neil Ferguson had said there will be 500,000 dead in the UK, there is still only 350,000 dead in the world. So the figures were so wildly inaccurate that we have to readdress now, and they have to hold their hands up and say, the predictions were wrong. Let's look at what we're dealing with. Let's look at the specific people who will be
most people can see now.
GP Sarah Jarvis there, my former adversary, who admitted to keeping her family outside on Christmas Day, even when the government said they could go inside. It wasn't easy taking a public stance for the poor, the old, the young, and anyone who was going to suffer harms from COVID theatre. But I did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. In my opinion, Sunak's words paint a picture of a man who lacked the spine to publicly call out what he now says he knew were policy mistakes. How dare you, Rishi Sunak? How dare you? I will welcome, forgive and embrace anyone who holds up their hands and says, fair dues, Bev, There were two sides to that story after all, and it's happening every day now. I don't need apologies, but I do respect humility. But the Chancellor of the Exchequer, really? He wasn't a passenger when, long after we had a clear picture of the infection fatality rate, said nothing to stop confused 98-year-old care home residents having to mouth "I love you" through windows, when all they wanted to do was to hold someone's hand. Sunak wasn't a passenger when schools closed, when the decades-old pandemic response plan was mysteriously ripped up in favour of a Chinese-style quarantine the healthy strategy. He wasn't a passenger when the chief medical officers took to the lecterns with baffling figures seemingly obfuscated to maintain the fear. He was a driver. He was one of a handful up front at the wheel, map in hand, as he helped drive the country into a brick wall with businesses closed, families destroyed, mental health problems exacerbated, and some educational achievements lost forever. He was in on the meetings that decided the NHS must be solely obsessed with a disease that was involved in the deaths of those averaging 82 years of age. Thanks to the growing treatment backlog he was well aware of, we are now deep in a period of excess weekly mortality in the relatively young, which dwarfs anything that COVID-19 managed. He also claims that it was he who thought up the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. By then, we knew that 75% of people in ICU with COVID were clinically obese. He might have been wiser to open all the gyms, pools and sports centres for free instead of encouraging us to eat twice as much for half the price. In every brief, we tried to stop the fear narrative, he now says. I constantly said it was wrong. No, you didn't. If you had genuinely believed that, you would have resigned noisily and defiantly with the backing of so many British people who could also see the COVID pantomime for what it was. You could have taken a temporary step off your own political career ladder, and ironically, you could have eventually come back, free from the stains of the COVID oil slick in which this country is now drowning. You say, Rishi Sunak, that you were ticked off by the Cabinet Office after saying it was time to live without fear. So tell us, who didn't want to hear that? Name names now and put your money where your mouth is. It's actually hard to know who Sunak is aiming this about turn at. Those of us who stuck our own necks out to question the non-scientific policy, whether that was on TV or even just around a family dinner table, are not ready to forgive those who were in power. Sunak has even said that minutes from SAGE meetings were edited to omit dissenting voices from final drafts. This caused lawyer Francis Hoare to tweet, "This is absolutely shocking. If this is true, then those responsible, and it is reasonable to suppose that Whitty and Vallance were at least aware, should face a criminal investigation for misconduct in public office." Quite right. Sunak has thrown the scientists under the bus. They will now blame the politicians who took the decisions. The inevitable infighting will be bloody and brutal, and it will finally allow us to see behind the curtain and find out why, in my opinion, insanity was allowed to run riot. I will have my popcorn ready.